And this is what makes scouting very difficult because you see things in college, whether it's Division II Shepherd College. That guy went to the Senior Bowl, and I texted people today in the NFL. I'm like, do you think everyone had a write-up? And they're like, yeah, he went to the Senior Bowl. People were on this guy. And then you get guys that win the Heisman Trophy that start quarterback, and everyone's, sending their GMs into Alabama. And you really like a guy. I really liked Bryce Young in college. I thought he was tough. I thought he was just a natural at playing the position. His instincts, his ability to read defense. He was just a really, really good player. But one conversation about him leading into the draft, which I think is the most concerning part if you're the Carolina Panthers, and the thing that has to keep you up at night, is he looks beyond small. I mean, you can't get any smaller. He's literally the smallest quarterback that's ever going to be drafted that high in the history of the league. And moving forward, that's never going to happen again. He looks like he weighs 150 pounds. And that was a huge point of conversation with the player, because ultimately the NFL is full of massive players that can all run really fast. Like, did you see Montez Sweat? You see the size and speed of these guys? Jalen Johnson, the corner for the Chicago Bears, outweighs and has Bryce Young by several inches. He's a DB, the corner. So size matters. And you watch that game and you go, one, from a skill set standpoint, it's not like he has the greatest arm. It's not like he's the fastest player. And he's just minuscule out there. I found this picture back when Muggsy Bogues, it was ironic because the Charlotte Hornets, or the Charlotte Hornets were playing the Chicago Bulls, just like tonight. And Muggsy and Michael Jordan has the ball and he's palming it because Michael had those huge hands, and he's looking down at Muggsy, who's basically at his drawstrings. And that's what Bryce Young looks like, a tiny little football player. But it'd be one thing if you're small and you have unreal skill set, right? Like a Kyler Murray, very small player, elite speed, elite arm. He's also much thicker of an athlete than Bryce. I texted a scouting director. I said, what was the best case for Bryce for the people that were high on him in the league? And they thought he had some Russell Wilson qualities. And you saw that flash toward the end of the game. If you were watching, don't blame me if you weren't. That's why I watched for the podcast to talk about the game, is scrambling around, making throws on the run. But the difference between Bryce and Russell, because remember, Russell, that rookie year, wasn't some guy that you thought was going to be, a Hall of Fame level player. But Russell was built like a tank. Russell Wilson weighed 220 pounds. Like, you don't need to be an NFL scout to look at Bryce in the huddle or standing there next to NFL players and go, does he weigh 165 pounds? I mean, honestly, with pads on, does he weigh 200 pounds? I know he weighed 200 pounds at the combine, but as an assistant GM told me, if you were in that room when he weighed in, it looked like he waddled up to the scale. And once that was over, he basically ran to the bathroom, whether to go to the bathroom, throw up, but it was all fake weight. It was 15, 20 pounds of not real pounds. And you're talking about a guy that people think at Alabama, he played in the low 170s. And listen, he's a really talented player. It's why he won the Heisman Trophy. It's why he started at Bama immediately after Mac Jones left. But sometimes how you are in college, and this is what makes scouting such an inexact science, doesn't necessarily translate to the NFL. Because you would have said this guy from Shepherd College tonight probably be a big scrub, and everyone's making fun of him. And you go Bryce Young, Alabama, number 1 overall pick. But when you watch the two of their skill sets, I would still take Bryce over him, but the gap isn't that wide. But when you put it relative to the skill set of some of the guys just drafted high in his draft, I know Anthony Richardson has banged up and is out for the season, but they're not comparable at all. Obviously, CJ Stroud is a dramatically better player. And then Will Levis, who is now the starter in Tennessee, has a top 5 arm immediately in the NFL. So I just don't know what his point of difference is as a player moving forward. And the other thing is, for him to be a good player, movement and scrambling, and I don't even mean running, because he's not, I know he had some runs tonight. He's not Lamar Jackson, Kyler. That's not really his game. He'd be much more similar, and I'm not comparing him to this player. I'm just saying, like, the way he'll play would be more like a Mahomes, or like I said, a younger Russell Wilson, where you scramble to throw. But if he gets hit at that size, there's going to be a point in time where he doesn't get, there were a couple times tonight where he just ran into sacks. God, is he going to be okay? He got up, but one of these times, these guys are outweighing him by 140 pounds. If a defensive tackle falls on him and he's 180 pounds and that guy's 330 pounds, you do the math. I mean, there's a reason that heavyweights aren't allowed to fight lightweights. That's the thing in the NFL. Size matters. Size matters in sports. There are outliers, right? Jose Altuve is an outlier. Tim Lincecum, when he was winning Cy Youngs, is an outlier. Most elite starting pitchers, most elite starting NBA basketball players, most elite starting NFL players have good to above average size relative to their position. And this guy does not. He's literally the smallest player we've ever seen at that position. And he got drafted number 1 overall. And just on the eye test, and listen, the pick sixes last week, and he had 7 picks coming in this game, whatever. It just doesn't look right. And part of that, I had someone with the Eagles text me. They're like, God, Frank has aged 20 years, it looks like, since we won the Super Bowl in 2018 or 17. He just doesn't look great, right? I don't think he's coaching very well. Are we sure Frank Reich is any good? And someone sent me this screenshot. I guess Pat McAfee had talked about David Tepper's recent firings. And, he gets the job. Rivera's the coach. Fires Rivera and makes Perry Fuel the interim. Fires him after the season. Just fired Matt Rule. Then Steve Wilkes fired him after the season. Like, this guy has unlimited money and things are not going well. So to think that this team is just going to go, let's say 2-15, and Frank is like just going to keep his job, I don't think that's a lock by any means. It's not like you hired a guy with some extensive resume of winning at a really high level. He's an offensive coach. You just drafted this guy number 1 overall, and he looks pitiful. He looks awful. He looks like we are screwed for the foreseeable future. And obviously the trade that you had to make to do that, I think the Carolina Panthers are in big, big trouble. And if Bryce was ever going to maximize whatever ability that is, and I'm not trying to play, listen, I like Bryce Young. I thought he was a really good player in college. I'm pivoting off that take. I would not want him as my quarterback based on what we've seen. And I don't see how anyone would agree. If you sat Dave Tepper and Frank down right now, they would have to take those other 3 quarterbacks over this guy. And I know Herb Street likes him because he calls these Bama games and tried to be bullish and positive, but it's like, come on, guys. I mean, there's a level of like, hey, there's some stuff to work with. And God, I don't see anything. Average to below arm, not great movement, tiny, coach who doesn't know what he's doing, no skill around him, awful offensive line, no skill position because you traded DJ Moore. I think Carolina is headed for, just way more problems. And when you have an owner who's new to pro sports and who has all this money, it's usually going to get a lot uglier before they figure this out. So sucks to be a Panther fan.